Welcome back to Breaking Free, Healing for the Black Sheep of the Family. This series, from Fundamental Foundations Counseling Center in Little Elm, Texas,
Yeah,
is for anyone who feels like they don't quite fit in their family.
right.
But we're really focusing on women who have felt this way for a long time.
Yeah.
Last time,
Hmm.
we dug into what it actually means to be the black sheep.
It's a powerful identity and one that often comes with a lot of baggage.
Exactly, and that's what we're unpacking in this episode.
Yeah.
It's like, even when you've moved out or set some distance, there's this feeling that those family experiences still have a grip on your life.
That's because those experiences can leave deep emotional wounds.
Right.
Understanding these wounds is a huge part of healing and truly breaking free.
Okay, so help me get this.
Sure.
How do past experiences, especially for women who felt like the black sheep, shape how we feel and function today?
Well, imagine emotional wounds as psychological scars. They're left by painful events, especially those that happen during childhood and adolescence, when we're still figuring out who we are.
Right.
Those experiences shape how we see ourselves and the world.
So what kind of experiences create these wounds for women who've always felt like the black sheep?
There are a few common threads.
Okay.
One is being the scapegoat, constantly blamed for family problems, regardless of the reality.
Oh, wow.
Research actually shows that scapegoating is more prevalent in families that struggle with conflict resolution and open communication.
That makes a lot of sense. I can see how being blamed all the time would leave someone feeling small and unworthy.
Absolutely. Then there's emotional neglect, feeling unseen or unheard by your parents or even siblings, like your feelings don't matter.
It's like being invisible, right? I imagine that's incredibly isolating.
It is. And then there's gaslighting, which is even more insidious.
Right.
It's when your emotions or experiences are denied or dismissed.
So it's like being told your reality isn't real. That must be so confusing and hurtful, especially for a young woman trying to find her voice.
Exactly. And on top of that, many black sheeps grow up feeling like love and acceptance are conditional.
Right.
Like they have to earn it by being a certain way rather than just being accepted for who they are.
That conditional love can be so damaging.
Right.
It creates this constant pressure to perform, to be what others expect, even if it goes against who you really are.
Precisely. And these wounds, they don't just disappear when we become adults.
So they linger, even if we try to move on.
Yes, they can stick with us sometimes without us even realizing it.
Wow.
They can affect our self-esteem, the relationships we form, our careers, even our mental health.
Right.
A study published in the Journal of Family Psychology found that adults who experienced emotional neglect in childhood were more likely to report symptoms of anxiety and depression.
That's heavy stuff. So if you're listening to this and this is hitting home, know that you're not alone and these patterns aren't some personal flaw.
They're understandable responses to a history of feeling invalidated. But here's the good news. Even deep-rooted patterns can change.
That's where it gets really interesting. How do we even start to recognize these patterns in ourselves and start to shift them?
One key is understanding emotional triggers.
Oh,
Think of them as emotional landmines from the past. When something happens in the present that echoes a past hurt, it can trigger a reaction that feels out of proportion to the current situation.
So what might be some common triggers for someone who's been the black sheep of their family, especially women who are dealing with the expectations and pressures that society puts on them?
Well, let's say you're at a family gathering
Right.
and you feel overlooked or dismissed.
Okay.
It might seem small on the surface, but for someone who's experienced a lot of emotional neglect,
Okay.
it can trigger those old feelings of not being seen or heard.
So it's like that past hurt is suddenly alive again in the present, even if the situation isn't as serious as what happened in the past.
Exactly. Or imagine receiving feedback at work, even if it's meant to be constructive. For someone who's been constantly criticized or scapegoated, it can trigger that familiar fear of not being good enough.
Yeah.
It's like their nervous system goes on high alert, remembering all those times their voice was silenced or their feelings were minimized.
And then, of course, witnessing favoritism or unfair treatment.
Yes.
Especially within the family dynamic. For a woman who's always felt like the outsider, that can be a huge trigger, reopening old wounds of not belonging or not being loved for who she is.
Absolutely, and being told they're overreacting or too sensitive.
Right.
For someone who has had their feelings dismissed repeatedly, that can be a major trigger.
It's like being told that their experiences and emotions aren't valid, which is especially difficult for women who are often stereotyped as being overly emotional.
Right, and these triggers can lead to what we call emotional flashbacks.
So how are those different?
Well, an emotional flashback is a sudden, intense wave of emotion, fear, sadness, anger, worthlessness, that feels completely overwhelming and disconnected from what's happening in the present moment.
So it's more than just feeling triggered.
Yes, it's like your body is reliving that past pain, even though the situation might be completely different.
Right.
And recognizing that you're having an emotional flashback is the first step to healing.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what can we do when we feel ourselves getting swept away by those intense emotions?
A helpful exercise is to pause and ask yourself 3 questions.
Okay.
What just happened that might have triggered me?
Right.
When was the first time I felt this way?
Okay.
And most importantly, is this reaction from the present moment, or is it an old wound resurfacing?
So we're trying to pinpoint the external trigger and connect it back to a specific experience from the past.
Exactly. That helps us separate the past from the present and gives us the power to respond intentionally rather than react impulsively.
Which is especially important for women who might feel pressure to suppress their emotions or downplay their experiences.
Yes, it's about reclaiming your power and giving yourself permission to feel your feelings fully without judgment.
So once we start recognizing these patterns, these triggers, and these emotional flashbacks, what are some practical things we can do to heal those old wounds, especially for women who may have been carrying these wounds for a long time?
One incredibly powerful tool, especially for women who might be used to putting others' needs first, is journaling.
Oh, yeah.
It's a safe space to process those difficult emotions, see those repeating patterns, and even start to reframe those painful experiences.
I love that it's like giving yourself permission to finally be heard, even if it's just by yourself.
Exactly. And it can be especially helpful for women who've been told to be quiet or agreeable, who've learned to suppress their feelings. Journaling allows them to reconnect with their inner voice and start to honor their own needs and experiences.
So if someone is listening and wants to try journaling to unpack their past, what are some prompts they could use?
Here are a few first try reflecting on the messages you received growing up, especially the ones that shaped your identity. Things you heard from family members like, "You're too sensitive," or "Why can't you be more like your sister?"
Right.
Write them down and then ask yourself, are these messages really true?
It's about challenging those narratives that we've internalized, the ones that tell us who we are or who we should be. It's about reclaiming our own stories.
Yes, it's about separating the messages that were imposed on us from the truths that reside within us. Another powerful prompt is to think about those moments where you felt unseen or dismissed, especially within your family.
Describe how those experiences made you feel and how they might still be impacting you today, especially in your relationships with other women. Maybe you find yourself competing with other women or constantly seeking their approval, or maybe you avoid close female friendships altogether.
That's a great point. Examining how those early family dynamics might be playing out in your present-day relationships is crucial.
And then there's the question of broader patterns in your relationships. Do you see anything that mirrors those early experiences? Are there repeating cycles in your friendships, romantic relationships, or even in your work life?
Identifying those patterns can be incredibly insightful. It helps us see how those early wounds are still influencing our choices and behaviors.
And finally, I love this one. Imagine you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, that girl who was struggling to find her place, who felt like she didn't belong. What do you need to hear today that you never heard growing up?
Write a letter to that younger version of yourself, offering her the validation, love, and support she deserved. This is a powerful way to reconnect with your inner child and begin to heal those old wounds.
These are such amazing prompts, and I think it's important to emphasize that unpacking the past isn't about dwelling on the pain or blaming others, especially not our mothers or female family members.
Exactly. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about understanding. It's about gaining self-awareness and recognizing how those past experiences have shaped who we are today.
It's about reclaiming our power and recognizing that we are not defined by our family's narrative or by the hurts of the past. And I think this is especially important for women who are often taught to prioritize family harmony and avoid conflict. But sometimes, in order to heal and grow, we need to break free from those expectations and prioritize our own well-being.
Absolutely. And understanding that we are capable of healing, that we have the strength and resilience to rewrite our stories.
Welcome back to Breaking Free. Healing for the black sheep of the family. So far, we've explored the emotional wounds that many black sheep carry, especially women, and how those past experiences can trigger us in the present. Now let's shift gears and talk about what we can actually do about it. How do we move forward and create a life that feels more peaceful, more aligned with who we truly are?
That's a great question, and it's where the real empowerment comes, and awareness is essential. But it's equally important to have tools to navigate the ups and downs of healing.
So where do we even begin? What are some practical things we can do to regulate our nervous systems when those difficult emotions come up, especially for women who are often socialized to put others' needs first and might feel guilty for prioritizing their own well-being?
You're right that societal conditioning can make it even harder for women to prioritize self-care, but it's absolutely crucial. One of the most powerful tools we have is our breath. Even just a few minutes of conscious breathing can have a profound effect on calming the nervous system.
It's amazing how something so simple can be so effective.
Yeah.
Any specific techniques you recommend?
One I often suggest is box breathing. You inhale slowly for a count of 4, hold your breath for 4. Exhale slowly for 4 and hold again for 4. Repeating this cycle for a few minutes can help shift you from a state of anxiety or overwhelm into a more grounded, centered place.
I love that, Campbell. I've also found that incorporating mindfulness practices into my daily routine helps me stay present and connected to my body. Things like yoga meditation, even just taking a walk in nature can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Those are all wonderful ways to cultivate awareness of your internal state and to learn to regulate your emotions. It's about finding what works for you and making it a consistent practice.
Now let's talk about boundaries. This can be such a game changer, especially for women who've felt like the black sheep and might be used to people pleasing or feeling like they need to earn love and approval.
Boundaries are essential for protecting your well-being, and you're right, it can be particularly challenging for women who've been conditioned to prioritize others' needs above their own. But remember, boundaries are not about being selfish or cutting people off. They're about defining what behaviors are acceptable to you and what you're willing to tolerate.
So how do we start setting those boundaries? It can feel so overwhelming, especially if you're used to giving in or feeling guilty for saying no.
Start small. Identify one area where you feel your boundaries are being crossed. Maybe it's constant phone calls that leave you feeling drained, or maybe it's unsolicited advice from family members about your life choices.
Okay, so you've identified that boundary then. What's
Okay.
that?
The next step is to clearly and assertively communicate that boundary. You can say something like, I love talking to you, but I'm not available for phone calls after 9 p.m., or I appreciate your input, but I'm confident in the decisions I'm making for my life.
I love that it's about stating your needs and limits in a way that is respectful but firm. But what happens when those boundaries are pushed or ignored, especially with family? It can be hard to stand your ground.
That's where consistency is key. If someone keeps calling after 9 p.m., don't answer. If someone disrespects your boundary by giving unwanted advice, calmly reiterate your boundary and disengage from the conversation.
So it's about following through with actions, not just words.
Exactly. It's about showing people what you will and will not tolerate. It takes practice, especially if you're used to people pleasing. There might be pushback, guilt trips, even anger. But each time you stand your ground, you're reinforcing those boundaries and building self-respect.
That's so empowering.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into healing for the black sheep of the family, what's one final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
Trust yourself. You are the expert on your own experience. You have the strength and wisdom to heal, to grow, and to create a life that is truly authentic and fulfilling.
That's beautiful. And remember, your healing is a gift not just to yourself, but to the world. As you break free from those old patterns and step into your power, you inspire others to do the same, especially other women who might be struggling with similar challenges.
The ripple effect of one person's healing can be incredibly powerful.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope this deep dive has given you some insights, tools, and most importantly, a sense of hope. Remember, you are not alone, and your healing matters.
Take control of your mental health with our membership program. Enjoy priority scheduling, session rollovers, and in-office and virtual appointments when you need them. Fundamental Foundations Counseling Center offers affordable plans tailored to your needs because your wellness matters. Visit fundamentalfoundcounseling.com to join today.